Ever felt like the world was against you just because of who you are? Dr. Camille Anderson did, and she fought back. The parking lot of the Westbridge Medical Center was anything but quiet. Nurses in their scrubs hurried to their cars after a long shift, interns lingering near the entrance to grab a breath of fresh air, and doctors winding down after the chaos of a day in the emergency room. The sun was bright and harsh, the kind of heat that clung to your skin in a way that made you long for a breeze. But for Dr. Camille Anderson, it was a welcome relief after the cold sterility of the operating room. Camille had just wrapped up a 14-hour shift, saving lives, calming the nervous, and guiding her team through moments of crisis. She felt the weight of her position as chief surgeon in Westbridge, but all she wanted now was a moment of peace, just a few minutes alone before the real world barged in again. As she walked toward her car, her heels clicking against the asphalt, she waved half-heartedly to a nurse who was finishing up her shift. "Get some rest, Dr. Anderson," the nurse called, a tired but friendly smile on her face. "We'd be lost without you, Doc," an intern added with a grin, still shaking off the anxiety of his first shift in the ER. Camille managed a small smile, feeling her exhaustion in every muscle. "Thanks, you all go home and get some sleep," she called back. It wasn't the first time she'd heard those words. In fact, it was almost routine. Her colleagues respected her work, but even more than that, they trusted her. Trusting Camille to make the calls no one else could, trusting her hands to do the kind of work that saved lives. But today, there was no comfort in those words. Today, all Camille wanted was to get in her car, close the door, and breathe. The hustle of the hospital was draining, but her work was far from over. As the chief surgeon, she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels for too long. Just as she slid her bag over her shoulder and reached for the car door, a sound shattered her thoughts. Screeching tires. Her heart skipped a beat as she whipped around. 2 police cars had pulled up aggressively, their sirens off but lights flashing wildly. Her stomach churned. Before she could even process what was happening, 2 officers stepped out, their faces unreadable, their hands hovering near their weapons. The hot sun seemed to burn a little brighter now. "Hey, what's going on?" Camille called, her voice steady, but the confusion was apparent. The male officer, broad-shouldered and stern-looking, glared at her. "You, step away from the vehicle," he ordered. Camille froze, her brain scrambling to understand. She glanced around. The parking lot, once full of the hustle of medical staff, had now gone eerily quiet. People were staring. The nurses who had just waved her off now looked uncomfortable, unsure of what was happening. This was a mistake. That was the only thing Camille could think. "This is my car," Camille said, keeping her voice firm, trying to hide the rising irritation in her chest. The heat of the sun was now a dull ache, and her skin prickled as if she were being watched by the entire world. "We received a report of a stolen vehicle matching this description," the female officer, shorter but no less imposing, said with suspicion in her tone. She eyed Camille like she was hiding something. "We need to see your ID." A wave of confusion washed over Camille. Stolen vehicle? She hadn't seen a stolen car anywhere near her, but still she reached into her bag. "I work here. You can ask anyone inside. My name's on the roster," Camille explained. But the officers weren't listening, or maybe they didn't care. The male officer took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "We're not asking again. Your ID now." The request was coming too fast, too aggressively, and for a moment Camille's hands trembled as she dug through her bag. What was going on? Why were they treating her like this? Her badge was at the bottom of the bag, tucked beneath a few papers. But before she could reach for it, the male officer's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. "Excuse me?" Camille snapped, pulling back instinctively. The sharpness in her voice was enough to startle her, but she wasn't about to let them intimidate her. She wasn't just any woman on the street. She was a respected surgeon at Westbridge Medical Center. But it didn't matter. The officer was quicker, and before Camille knew it, she was spun around, shoved roughly against the hood of her car. A gasp came from someone nearby. Camille's eyes widened in shock as the officers held her in place. "What the hell is going on?" a voice shouted from across the lot. Camille's eyes darted toward the entrance to the hospital. The door flew open and several people, nurses, doctors, Even security rushed out in a blur. "Dr. Anderson?" someone called from the crowd, their voice tinged with disbelief. "Let her go!" another nurse shouted, her hands balled into fists, eyes wide with anger. "She's the chief surgeon here. What are you doing?" a young resident demanded, stepping forward with fury etched across his face. The officers froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Camille could feel the stares of her colleagues burning into her back, a sea of medical staff who had just seen her get handled like a criminal in the middle of a parking lot. The realization hit them, hard and fast. Camille stood tall, her breath shallow but steady, her back straight despite the officer's hands still gripping her. She didn't speak. The silence hung thick in the air. One of the nurses stepped closer, her voice trembling as she shouted at the officers, "You don't know who you're dealing with!" And then the female officer's grip released, and the male officer stepped back, stammering an apology that fell hollow in the thickening air. Camille didn't flinch. She brushed the dust from her coat and straightened her posture, a quiet, seething anger building beneath her calm exterior. "Save it," Camille finally said, her voice cool but cutting. Her colleagues, still standing at the entrance, were a silent reminder that this wasn't just an isolated moment. It was a pattern. But in that moment, Camille realized something. She wasn't going to just let it go. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. The two officers stood a few feet away, their eyes not quite meeting Camille's as they shuffled awkwardly. Camille, still standing with her back straight and hands clenched by her sides, felt every muscle in her body tense. Her colleagues were still gathered around, murmuring among themselves, some too stunned to speak, others shooting the officers angry, accusatory looks. The parking lot was buzzing with an energy that had shifted in an instant, from a quiet end-of-shift routine to something much more charged. Camille took a slow breath, her eyes scanning the crowd of hospital staff around her. They all looked to her for guidance. She could feel their eyes on her, their collective frustration mirrored in their stares. One of the nurses, a tall woman with short hair and a steady presence, walked closer. "Camille," she said, her voice calm but with an edge to it. "Are you okay?" Camille didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the officers once more, then turned back to the nurse. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words felt hollow. She was fine physically, but mentally, her mind was swirling with 1,000 thoughts, too many to make sense of in a moment like this. The male officer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, but we were just doing our job." The apology felt insincere, an automatic response that was meant to placate the growing crowd. Camille's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned her gaze toward him, letting the silence stretch between them. The female officer stood beside him, her eyes darting nervously between Camille and the others in the crowd. "We didn't know who you were, ma'am," she said. "We're sorry. It won't happen again." Camille shook her head slowly. "Do you really think that's enough?" Her voice was quiet, but every word dripped with disbelief. "I don't need you to apologize for doing your job. What I need is for you to realize that you didn't do your job. You didn't bother to ask. You didn't bother to find out who I was before you decided I was a threat. That's the problem." The officers remained silent, their faces hardening as they exchanged a brief look. Camille's heart was pounding, but she wasn't about to let them get away with this. Not today. Not when she had just spent the last 14 hours fighting for lives in the operating room. Lives she had earned the right to protect, to save. A few seconds passed before the male officer cleared his throat again. "We'll report this, ma'am. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again." He didn't sound convincing, and Camille didn't buy it for a second. Behind her, one of the doctors, Dr. Karen Holt, a senior attending who had worked alongside Camille for years, took a few steps forward. "You don't get it," Karen said, her voice rising with each word. "She's not just anyone. She's the head of surgery here. You should have known that. You should have asked before you turned a routine moment into an assault." The crowd around them began to murmur, voices growing louder. It wasn't just a few staff members now. The entire parking lot had become a sea of eyes and angry whispers. Camille could feel the anger building inside her too, but it wasn't the kind of anger that burned. No, this was the kind of cold anger that made you want to act, to do something. I've spent years in this hospital, Camille said, her voice steady yet unwavering. I've saved hundreds of lives. I've been here for my community, and I've earned my place here. But apparently my work means nothing out here. It means nothing when it's just me in the parking lot. It means nothing when I'm just another woman of color being treated like a criminal. Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. For a long moment, no one said a word. The silence that followed felt deafening, each person there processing what had just happened, what Camille had just said. The officers didn't know how to respond, their apologies still hanging awkwardly in the air. But Camille wasn't finished. She turned away from them, the heat in her chest rising as she looked at the crowd that had gathered. You can apologize all you want. You can pretend like this is just a mistake, a misunderstanding, she continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, making sure everyone heard her words. But this happens to so many of us. We're reduced to our skin color, to the assumptions people make about who we are, and I'm tired of it. The crowd was quiet, but Camille could see the shift in the energy, the murmurs, the shared looks, the way they all seemed to understand her pain. And then, out of nowhere, one of the security guards, a young black man who had witnessed the whole thing, stepped forward. His voice was firm. Camille's right, he said, looking directly at the officers. This isn't just about her. It's about every single person of color who's had to deal with this kind of treatment. There was a pause. The officers remained stiff, eyes forward, but Camille could see a shift in their demeanor. The realization was starting to hit. But instead of responding, the male officer turned to the female officer and gave a subtle nod. Without another word, they turned around and walked back to their cars, getting in and driving off. The flashing lights slowly faded and the crowd began to disperse. Some stayed behind, gathering their things, while others walked away, heads down, quietly processing what had just unfolded. Camille stood there, her heart still racing, her mind swirling with everything that had just happened. She could feel her colleagues looking at her, waiting for some kind of reassurance. She offered none. Let's go inside, Camille said, her voice quieter now. The day's not over yet. But what Camille didn't know was that this moment wasn't just over, it was just beginning. The ride up to her office felt like the longest stretch Camille had endured in a long time. As she slid into the elevator and the doors closed behind her, the soft hum of the machine seemed almost deafening. The buzz of the hospital had dulled, replaced by a quiet intensity that wrapped around her like a heavy fog. She couldn't shake the image of the officers' faces, the way they had treated her like a suspect. The sheer ridiculousness of it all hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the hospital's normally sterile environment. She was Dr. Camille Anderson, chief surgeon of Westbridge Medical Center, a title she had earned after years of hard work, relentless study, and sacrifice. Yet today, she had been reduced to just another black woman on the street, another face that fit a description. The elevator dinged as it reached her floor. As the doors slid open, she was greeted by the familiar hum of nurses, doctors, and staff moving through the hallways. But today, even this normal rhythm felt different. There was an odd stillness to the place. People glanced at her as she passed, some offering faint nods, others looking down quickly as if they hadn't seen her at all. Camille entered her office, sitting down behind her desk with a sigh. She closed her eyes for a moment, rubbing her temples as the weight of the day settled in. The sounds of the hospital continued outside her door, but here it was just her, and the silence of what she knew was coming. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Camille? It was Dr. Holt, her longtime colleague and close friend. Karen stepped in, closing the door gently behind her. I know you're probably not in the mood for company, but I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Camille didn't answer right away. She glanced at Karen, then back down at the papers scattered across her desk, her fingers running over the edge of a medical file. I don't know if I'm okay, Karen, Camille finally said, her voice strained. I don't know what to do with this. What's next? Karen took a seat in the chair across from Camille, her expression one of concern, but also determination. We make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what we do. We speak up. Camille's eyes flicked to her friend's face, searching for some kind of assurance, but there was only resolve there. You're talking about going public with this? Karen nodded. Yes, you can't let them walk away like this. This wasn't just about you. This happens every single day for so many people. You have a platform, Camille Charam. You're a leader here. It's time to use it. Camille leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. The thought of making a public stand felt overwhelming, but deep down she knew Karen was right. She couldn't let the incident slide, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated the same way. Do you really think it'll make a difference? Camille asked quietly, looking out the window at the city skyline beyond. I mean, how much can one person really change? Karen's voice softened but remained firm. You don't have to change everything at once, Camille, but you can be the spark. If you don't say anything, you're letting this cycle continue. People need to hear your story. People need to see this. We have to fight back. Camille was silent for a moment, letting her friend's words sink in. She felt a knot in her stomach, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had always been about action, about saving lives in the operating room. But this was different. This wasn't a surgery or a procedure she could control. It wasn't a medical emergency. This was personal. Her heart was still racing, her mind caught in a whirlwind of emotions. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't just let this go. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to stay silent now. I'm doing it, Camille said finally, her voice steady with newfound conviction. I'm going to speak out. Karen smiled, relief washing over her face. Good. You're not alone in this. We'll stand with you, Camille, every step of the way. But as Camille leaned back in her chair, something deep inside her shifted. She knew this would be a battle not just against the system, but against everything that had kept people silent for so long. But she was ready. What she didn't know yet, though, was how the world would respond. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, the routine of hospital life carrying on as usual. But for Camille, nothing was the same. The events in the parking lot had cast a long shadow over everything. The whispers, the sideways glances, the lingering stares. Her colleagues were all aware of what had happened, and it felt as if a piece of the hospital's atmosphere had shifted. Her office phone rang incessantly, her inbox flooded with emails from reporters, community leaders, and people with strong opinions, on both sides. Camille hadn't expected the support to be so overwhelming, nor had she anticipated the backlash. The incident had sparked conversations far beyond the confines of Westbridge. Her actions were now a topic of national discussion, one that was unraveling in real time. Camille, you need to be ready for this, Karen said, entering her office one afternoon with a serious look on her face. The news outlets are calling non-stop. They want interviews. They want your side of the story, and it's getting ugly. Camille leaned back in her chair, her fingers rubbing her forehead. I thought I was just standing up for myself. I didn't know it was going to become this. Karen sat down, looking at her with concern. That's how it works. When you speak out, you become the face of something bigger. People will scrutinize everything you say, everything you do. You're under a microscope now. Camille nodded slowly. She had always prided herself on being able to keep a cool head in the operating room. But this was something entirely different. I didn't sign up for this. I know you didn't, Karen replied softly. But you're in it now, and you're doing the right thing. Don't forget that. Just then, the door to Camille's office opened without a knock, and Dr. Sean Wallace, one of the senior surgeons and a longtime friend, stepped inside. He looked somber, his usually easygoing demeanor replaced by something more serious. Camille, he started, his voice gentle. Can we talk? Camille straightened up in her chair. Of course. What's on your mind, Sean? He closed the door behind him, walking over to the chair next to her desk. I heard about what happened with the police, and I wanted to apologize. I'm sure you're getting a lot of opinions, but I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you. What you did, it took guts. Not everyone would have had the courage to speak up the way you did. Camille was taken aback by his words, the sincerity in his voice unexpected. Thank you, Sean. It's been a lot to process. Sean hesitated for a moment before continuing. But there's something else we need to talk about. Camille's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? There's been some pressure coming down from the top, he said, his voice lowering. The board, the administration. They're worried about the hospital's image. They don't like the attention this is bringing. And there's talk about possibly reassigning you, maybe even taking you off some of the high-profile surgeries. The weight of his words hit Camille like a freighted train. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment. What? Reassign me? For what? Standing up for myself? Sean nodded. They're worried about public relations, and they're worried about the backlash. Some of the board members have questioned your judgment. Are you serious? Camille's voice rose in disbelief. I save lives in that OR every day, and now they want to take me off surgeries because I got treated like a criminal in the parking lot? I'm just telling you what's being said, Camille, Sean said softly. You know how these things go. The hospital doesn't want to be the center of controversy. They're afraid of losing donations, patient trust, all of it. Camille's jaw clenched. She felt her blood pressure rise, her heart pounding in her chest. How could they? After everything she had done for this hospital, for this community, they were willing to throw her under the bus just to protect their image? They can't be serious, Camille muttered, standing up and pacing in front of her desk. I'm the best surgeon here. I've earned my place, and they want to just toss me aside? Sean didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. Camille, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but to make you aware. There's a lot at stake here. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She could feel her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. I didn't fight for this job just to have it taken away because I stood up for what's right. I've fought for every damn patient in that OR, and I'm not backing down now. Not for them, not for anyone. Sean looked at her, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. You have a lot of people who support you, Camille, but there are also a lot of people who want this to go away. I don't care, Camille said, her voice hardening with resolve. I'm not letting this go. Not now, not ever. After a long pause, Sean nodded. All right, but be careful, Camille. This is going to get ugly. As he left her office, Camille sat back down behind her desk, her mind whirling. She had come this far. She had earned everything she had, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not the hospital board, strip that away from her. She picked up her phone and typed a quick message to Karen. We need to talk to the media, now. But Camille knew the real battle was just beginning. The pressure was on her now, and she had to decide just how far she was willing to go to fight for what was right. Camilla's fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing, deleting, then typing again. She had spent the better part of the night drafting a statement, but each time she read it, it felt inadequate. She needed to get this right, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, for everyone who had been silenced, whose voices had been ignored. It was 3 a.m. and the weight of the decision pressed down on her chest like a 1,000-pound weight. The hospital had given her an ultimatum. Smooth things over or face the consequences. They hadn't come out and said it directly, but the meaning was clear. If she went public with her story, the hospital would distance itself from her. Her position could be on the line. They were already talking about reassignment, and she knew it wouldn't stop there. But Camille couldn't back down. Not now, not after everything she had been through, and certainly not after the humiliation she had faced in front of her colleagues, the officers, and the hospital staff. With a deep breath, she hit send. She was done hiding. As the press began picking up the story, Camille was bombarded with interviews, requests for statements, and an endless flood of questions. The tension in the air was palpable. At the hospital, at home, everywhere she went. Her phone buzzed nonstop, but she ignored it, focusing instead on what was coming next. The first interview was with a local news station. Camille sat across from the reporter, her face calm but her heart racing. The lights from the camera felt blinding, but she focused on her words, steadying herself. She had practiced this moment 100 times, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. So, Dr. Anderson, let's start with the incident in the parking lot, the reporter began, her voice neutral but with an undercurrent of curiosity. Can you tell us what happened? Camille took a breath, glancing directly into the camera. She wasn't just talking to this reporter. She was talking to the entire world. I was leaving work after a long shift at the hospital, Camille said, her voice steady. I was just getting in my car when two officers approached me, demanding to see my ID. They accused me of stealing my own vehicle. They didn't ask my name, didn't take a second to find out who I was. They just saw the color of my skin and decided that was enough. Her words hung in the air, and Camille could feel the weight of the statement. She knew it would make people uncomfortable. She knew it would spark outrage, but it was the truth. The reporter raised an eyebrow. And how did you respond? I told them who I was, Camille continued, her voice growing stronger. I told them I was a doctor at Westbridge Medical Center. But they didn't listen. They didn't care. There was a beat of silence. Camille could feel the reporter's gaze, but she didn't look away. It was only after my colleagues came outside, after they recognized me, that the officers finally backed off. But by then it was too late. The damage had already been done. The reporter nodded, a somber look in her eyes. You've said that this is bigger than just your incident. What did you mean by that? Camille paused, gathering her thoughts. She didn't just want to talk about herself. She wanted to make sure the story resonated with everyone who had ever felt that sting of injustice, that feeling of being underestimated or mistreated. This happens every day, Camille said, her voice growing firmer, more resolute. It happens to people of color, to women, to anyone who doesn't fit a certain image of what's acceptable. It's not just a one-off. It's part of a system that treats people differently because of the way they look. And I'm not going to be silent about it anymore. Not when I have the opportunity to make a change. The reporter nodded thoughtfully, but Camille could see the wheels turning in her head. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a conversation that was beginning to ripple across the country. The fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up the story like wildfire, and social media exploded with reactions. Some supportive, some not so much. There were messages of encouragement from fellow doctors, nurses, and activists, but there were also harsh comments from people who couldn't fathom what Camille was saying. The trolls came out in full force, calling her everything from overdramatic to disruptive. But none of it mattered. Camille stayed focused on the bigger picture. The support she was getting was far more important than the hate. As the days went on, the hospital felt the pressure too. The board members were growing nervous. They couldn't ignore the backlash, and they couldn't pretend this wasn't affecting the reputation of the hospital. One morning, a week after the incident, Camille was called into a meeting with the board. She walked into the conference room, her colleagues beside her for support. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. She was ready for this moment. The head of the board, a well-dressed man in his mid-50s, looked at her with a mix of concern and frustration. Dr. Anderson, he started, his tone formal, you've caused quite a stir with your public statements. As you know, the hospital's reputation is at stake here. We need to address this situation. Camille squared her shoulders. What do you want from me? She asked bluntly. You want me to apologize? To retract everything I've said? The board members exchanged glances, and the head of the board cleared his throat. We're not asking for an apology, Dr. Anderson. But we need you to understand that this situation has far-reaching consequences. We've received multiple complaints, and we're concerned about the hospital's future. Camille's gaze hardened. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. You want me to retract my statement? You want me to ignore the systemic issues that affect people like me every day? I won't do that. There was a long silence. Camille could feel the tension in the room as her words hung in the air. She had expected them to try to bully her, to make her feel small, but she wasn't backing down now. After what felt like an eternity, the head of the board spoke again, his voice low. You are walking a dangerous line, Dr. Anderson. This could cost you everything. I'm willing to lose everything, Camille said without hesitation, her voice unwavering, because the truth is worth more than anything you could ever offer me. The room fell silent. Camille could see the looks on the board members' faces, their shock, their disbelief. They weren't used to people challenging their authority like this. But Camille didn't care. She had taken a stand, and she was prepared to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that this fight was worth it. And in that moment, Camille understood something fundamental. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for anyone who had ever been silenced, anyone who had ever been treated as less than. She was fighting for change. The weeks following Camille's defiant stand in the boardroom were a whirlwind. The hospital had attempted to pressure her, to make her retract her statements, but Camille refused. The pressure only intensified, but so did her resolve. News outlets continued to cover the story, and while some criticized her for causing a disruption, many others praised her bravery. For the first time in a long while, Camille felt the weight of her actions, but it didn't feel heavy in the way it used to. It felt like battle she was meant to fight. By now, Camille had become a symbol of resistance, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been treated unfairly. Her message was simple: I won't be silenced. But as much as the media attention and the support from various communities sustained her, there were moments where doubt crept in. She couldn't help but wonder what this would mean for her future at Westbridge. The whispers in the hallways had never quite stopped. Some doctors, those who had once been her closest colleagues, started keeping their distance. There were subtle, passive-aggressive comments from a few people. Some seemed unsure of what side to take. It wasn't just the hospital, it was everywhere. People in the community were talking, some supportive, others angry. But in the face of it all, Camille found strength in something she hadn't expected: the overwhelming support from her own patients. It started with a letter. Camille had received it one morning, an envelope marked confidential and addressed to her personally. The handwriting was neat, the words carefully chosen. Dr. Anderson, you saved my life. I've been in your care for years, and I've never once questioned your decisions or the integrity of your character. I know it takes strength to stand up against a system that's been wrong for so long. You have my full support. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. You've got this. The letter was from a patient she had treated for months, a woman who had gone through numerous surgeries under Camille's care. It wasn't the only letter. More came in floods. Messages from people in the community who had known Camille not just as a doctor, but as someone who had always done right by them. Someone who had shown up day in and day out when they needed her the most. The support from her patients was a lifeline. It reminded her why she had become a doctor in the first place: to help people, to be there for them when it mattered most. It also reminded her that standing up for what was right was more than just about speaking out. It was about showing up. One afternoon, nearly a month after her public statements, Camille was walking through the hospital when she was stopped by a familiar face: Dr. Karen Holt. Karen had always been someone who was there when Camille needed a friend, and this time was no different. Camille, Karen said, her voice soft but filled with a conviction. I've been thinking about what you said in that board meeting, and I just wanted to tell you that, for what it's worth, I stand with you. You've got the backing of the right people here. Some of us have been too silent for too long, but that ends today. Camille's heart swelled with gratitude. Thank you, Karen. I wasn't sure who would still be here after everything that's happened. Don't doubt that, Karen replied. You're not alone in this fight. There are more of us than you think. And if the board wants to question your position here, then maybe it's time we question theirs. Camille smiled, her shoulders finally feeling a bit lighter. Maybe you're right. By the following week, the pressure from the board had reached its peak. The stories of Camille's treatment had stirred up something deeper, and the public was demanding accountability. But it wasn't just the public outcry that swayed things. It was the collective strength of her colleagues, the community, and the very patients she had spent her life serving. In an unexpected turn, the hospital board requested another meeting with Camille. This time, however, the tone was different. When Camille walked into the room, she was greeted with a calm, almost apologetic atmosphere. The head of the board, who had once threatened her mom, looked directly at her for the first time without judgment in his eyes. Dr. Anderson, he began, his voice more conciliatory than it had been in their previous encounter. We've heard from our staff, from the community, and from patients. We understand the gravity of the situation, and we recognize your invaluable contributions to this hospital and the work you've done for years. We apologize for how you were treated, and we want to offer our full support moving forward. Camille was stunned. She had expected this to be another round of pressure, another attempt to have her back down. But instead, it was an acknowledgement of the truth. The board had made a mistake, and they were finally owning it. We've also taken a look at our policies, the board chair continued, and we want to make changes. We're implementing diversity and bias training for all our staff, and we'll be working on creating a more inclusive environment here. Camille blinked, trying to process it all. You're not just apologizing, are you? You're actually going to make changes. The board nodded. Yes, we are. We've heard the message loud and clear. This isn't just about one incident. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels seen and heard, and we want to be a part of that change. As Camille left that meeting, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't just the victory, it was the realization that her stand had actually made a difference. She had forced people to confront their own biases, their assumptions, and the way they treated those who didn't fit the mold. As she stood outside the hospital, taking in the crisp morning air, Camille realized something. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But she had made a powerful impact, and in that moment, she felt ready for whatever came next. Camille had proven something important, not just to the world, but to herself. She had fought not just for her career or her reputation, but for justice. And no matter what came next, that was something no one could take away from her. And with that, the world had shifted. Just a little, but enough to make all the difference. Camille's journey wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about standing up for what's right, for fairness, and for a world where we all deserve to be treated with dignity. Her story is one of courage, resilience, and the power of speaking out in the face of injustice. Now it's your turn. If you've ever been in a position where you felt overlooked, dismissed, or mistreated, know that your voice matters. Change doesn't happen in silence. Speak up. Stand tall. Whether it's in your workplace, community, or everyday life, your courage can spark a movement. Don't let anyone tell you your story doesn't matter. If you believe in justice, equality, and standing up for what's right, share this story. Encourage those around you to find their voice too. Together we can push for real change. Take a stand, speak out, and never back down.